Have you ever realized you became the villain in a story you never agreed to be part of? That somewhere along the way, people you loved decided who you were without ever asking if it was true. That Christmas, sitting at the head of my own table in the house I'd lived in for over 40 years, I understood something far worse than being disliked. I was being judged for a lie that was about to destroy what little I had left. I didn't know exactly when it started or who first decided I was the monster. All I knew was everyone believed it, and tonight, the people I'd given my whole life were finally going to act on it. From the outside, my house still looked like something off a postcard: warm porch light against the cold, a crooked wreath I could never get quite right, tree lights blinking in the front window like tiny promises that didn't mean much anymore. Inside smelled like turkey and cinnamon and just a hint of something burnt. I always burn at least one thing no matter how careful I am. I'd been on my feet since before sunrise, back aching, fingers stiff, telling myself over and over that if I just kept busy, I wouldn't have to think about what was coming later. For a few quiet minutes with my coffee in my hands, I almost let myself believe this Christmas might pass without trouble. Almost. Then the grandkids burst through the door, coats flying, voices ringing through the house as they shouted "Grandma," like it was the best word they knew. No matter how tired I am, that sound still breaks me open. I hug them tight, breathing in cold air and toy plastic and childhood. For a heartbeat, the dread went quiet. Then Michael walked in. My son looked older than I remembered, shoulders tight, eyes carrying a weight he never used to have. His hug was quick, polite, not the way it used to be. It stung, but I swallowed it like I always did. And then Emma stepped inside. Cream-colored coat, perfect hair, perfect makeup. The kind of fragile beauty that makes strangers protective before she ever opens her mouth. She hesitated in the doorway just long enough to look uncertain, just long enough to look small. "Merry Christmas, Linda," she said softly, like she was already bracing for harm. The room changed the second she spoke. I felt eyes flick to me, measuring my reaction, waiting. I set my smile in place, tight at the edges. "Merry Christmas, honey," I said. Dinner began the way it always does, crowded, loud, polite, in all the careful ways families get when they're pretending nothing is wrong. The table looked beautiful. Turkey carved clean, mashed potatoes piled high, candles flickering in the crystal dishes I only use once a year. It could have been a holiday magazine photo. That's when the first blade slid in. "This turkey is amazing," Emma said brightly. "I don't know how you still have the energy to do all this at your age." Laughter followed like she'd paid for it in advance. I smiled through clenched teeth. Years of practice will do that. When my youngest granddaughter dropped her fork, Emma leaned in gently. "Careful, sweetheart. Grandma doesn't like messes." Light as air, everyone chuckled. My grandbaby's face folded like she'd done something terrible. My hands shook as I slid her a clean fork. "It's all right, honey," I whispered. "Grandma's not mad." My voice betrayed me anyway. Michael didn't look at me, he looked at Emma. "You okay?" he asked her quietly, like she was the one who'd been hurt. That was the moment something cracked inside my chest. The noise swelled around me, voices, plates, phones buzzing, wine loosening tongues. I nodded when spoken to, answered in short, safe sentences, feeling like a stranger at my own table. By the time dessert came, the weight in my chest had grown so heavy it pressed the air from my lungs. I lifted the pie plate and escaped into the kitchen under the excuse of serving. My hands shook so badly I had to set the plate down. The refrigerator hummed. The old clock ticked louder than it ever had. "Pull it together, Linda," I whispered to my reflection in the dark microwave door. "Not tonight." That's when I heard her voice in the hallway, soft, trembling just right. "I'm just so tired," Emma whispered to my niece. I try so hard to keep the peace, but nothing I do is ever enough with her. I didn't mean to listen, I swear I didn't. But when your own name is spoken like a secret, your body moves on its own. "I don't think she even knows how much damage she's done," Emma continued quietly. "The things she put me through, I wouldn't wish it on anyone." My chest tightened. "You're so strong for surviving it," my niece murmured. "I didn't have a choice," Emma whispered. After what she took from me, I had to stay. I had to let the truth come out in its own time. A cold memory brushed against me, a lawyer's office, yellow light, shaking hands, documents that stained my name before I ever touched them. Rumors that spread faster than facts. You mean the paperwork mess? My niece asked carefully. Yes, Emma said, the inheritance, everything my father left me, I lost all of it because of her. My knees nearly gave out. I'm done hiding, Emma said softly. Tonight I'm finally making things right. That sentence was the gunshot. I didn't step into the hallway. I didn't scream. I simply stood there in the half dark, realizing my daughter in law wasn't just playing the victim anymore. She was preparing an execution. I returned to the dining room with the pie, my hands steady in a way that terrified me, and set it on the table like nothing had happened. Across from me, Emma lifted her eyes and met mine. And for the first time all night, her smile didn't quite reach them. I stood alone in the half dark of my kitchen after that hallway whisper like someone had knocked the air clean out of my lungs. Laughter drifted in from the dining room, bright and careless, forks still scraping plates, a world untouched by what had just been turned inside out for me. The pie plate trembled in my hands. I steadied it against the counter, drew one slow breath, and told myself not to fall apart where she could ever see it. Her story echoed in my head, forged documents, stolen inheritance, my life rearranged into a lie so smooth it almost sounded believable. And what cut deepest wasn't the accusation. It was how easily she wore it, like a coat she'd tailored years ago, waiting for the right weather. I walked back into the dining room with the pie and the same practiced smile I'd worn through 1,000 quiet hurts. The evening folded back into noise. The children begged for whipped cream. Carol laughed too loud at something I didn't hear, and Emma dabbed at the corners of her eyes as though emotion had simply overtaken her. Once or twice she lifted her gaze to mine. There was no guilt there, only a careful, waiting calm. I said nothing. I hugged everyone good night, kissed the grandkids' hair, let Michael give me his distant little kiss on the cheek. Watched Emma wrap herself against him like she needed shielding from the world. When their car lights finally slipped out of sight, my strength went with them. I lowered myself into the nearest chair like my bones had decided they were finished holding me up. Carol stayed behind to help clean. She rattled dishes louder than necessary, filling the air with harmless noise, and finally asked if I was feeling all right. Just tired, I said. It was the safest truth I had. After she left, the house fell into that hollow kind of quiet only holidays leave behind. I locked the door, turned off the lamps one by one, and stood a long time in my dark bedroom listening to my own breathing. I did not sleep much. Each time I drifted off, I was back in that lawyer's office from years ago, the yellow light, the stale coffee, the papers sliding across the desk toward me like a sentence instead of a document. I woke before dawn with a decision already sitting heavy and steady in my chest. By morning, fear had burned itself down into focus. I made coffee strong enough to sting my senses awake and pulled the old metal lockbox from the back of my closet, still hidden behind winter coats that hadn't fit right in years. I hadn't opened it in over a decade. The latch stuck for a second before giving way. Inside were the things I'd sworn I would never need again: yellowed legal papers, brittle envelopes, business cards from attorneys who were probably long gone. I spread them across the kitchen table in the thin morning light. My hands did not shake this time. I found the page that had haunted me longest, the one claiming I'd authorized funds that were never mine to touch. I traced the date with my finger. Emma had said the theft involved forged documents tied to an inheritance. My scandal hadn't involved my own family. It had been tied to a client of my late husband's, a man I barely knew. No charges had ever stuck, not because I was cleared, but because there had never been enough proof. I read everything again, slowly, carefully. At first, nothing changed, just the same old wound laid open. Then I saw it, a third name. A witness signature I'd never questioned because it had meant nothing to me back then. Ordinary, forgettable. I whispered it under my breath, trying to wake my memory. Nothing came until something cold clicked into place. Don't jump to conclusions, I warned myself. I searched the name online, old directories, dead profiles, wrong people. My hope thinned with each useless result. Then my phone rang in my hand and nearly made me drop it. Emma. I let it ring twice before answering. She sounded gentle, warm, asked if I was feeling all right after such a long night, said she'd made extra lemon bread and thought of me. I thanked her, kept my voice steady, said I was resting. When the call ended, the quiet felt dangerous. She wasn't checking on me, she was checking what I knew. I kept digging. Buried deep in archived records from a small regional paper, I found a legal notice, barely a paragraph, about a woman who had legally changed her name years earlier. Old names, new name. I stared at it until the room felt unsteady. The new name matched my daughter-in-law's maiden name. No, I whispered. That's not possible. I compared handwriting next. Pulled out an old Christmas card she'd sent years ago, laid it beside the witness signature. The match was not dramatic, it was worse, it was subtle, the same pressure, the same slanted letters, the same careless flick at the end, different name. Same hand. By afternoon, I drove downtown to the records office, heart pounding harder with each mile. The clerk eyed me with mild suspicion when I asked for the old estate file. She disappeared into the back for what felt like a lifetime. When she returned, she slid a thin folder across the counter. "This is all that's available," she said flatly. Inside were filings I recognized and one amendment I did not. A quiet correction filed years after the original case closed. The secondary witness had been updated. Emma's old name, my fingers went numb. Someone had gone back after the fact, quietly, patiently. Changing footprints instead of making noise. That wasn't panic, that was planning. On the drive home, my phone rang again. "Michael, Mom, Emma's been real upset lately," he said. I asked what about. He hesitated. "She says she's been carrying some heavy things about the past. About you. She's thinking about clearing the air at the next family dinner." Clearing the air, public execution. I ended the call gently and sat in my driveway long after the engine had gone silent. Emma was no longer waiting. She was moving toward exposure, toward humiliation, toward a truth only she controlled the shape of. That night I opened the lockbox again, but this time I no longer saw old scars, I saw a pattern. Timelines, gaps, inconsistencies, motive. I did not plan in anger, I planned in silence. If Emma wanted a confession at a family table, she would get one, just not the one she expected. I would not challenge her privately. I would not give her the chance to erase anything else. I would let her speak. And then, with everyone watching, I would show them what she had spent years trying to hide from the very beginning. I barely slept, my body rested, but my mind prowled all night, circling the same image over and over, that witness signature, the careless flick at the end of the name, the same flourish Emma used on cards and notes like she was signing something she owned. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. By the time the light crept through the blinds, the tightness in my chest had changed. It wasn't fear now, it was pressure, focus, the kind that comes right before something breaks. My phone buzzed just after 7. "Michael, calls that early only mean one thing." "Mom," he said quietly, like he didn't want anyone else to hear him. She's not doing great this morning." I already knew who he meant. "What happened?" I asked. He hesitated. I heard movement behind him, Emma's voice faint and trembling. "She had another bad night," he said. "Christmas brought everything back for her, the past. She says she can't keep pretending nothing happened between the two of you." There it was, the ticking clock had grown teeth. "I'm sorry she's hurting," I said carefully, "but I don't know what she thinks happened between us." "She's thinking about telling everyone," he said. "At Sunday dinner, she says it's time the truth comes out." "Sunday, 3 days. Michael," I asked softly, "what truth?" Another pause. "She hasn't given me all the details yet, but it's about money and inheritance." "About you," the word landed like a cold stone in my stomach. "I see," I said. "She's scared," he added. Of course she was. A victim is always scared when the audience is gathering. After we hung up, I didn't cry, I didn't sit. I went straight to the closet, pulled out the lockbox, and placed it on the bed like a weapon I'd finally decided to use. 3 days. That was all I had before Emma tried me in front of my own blood. The records office hit its first wall fast. The clerk barely looked at me when I gave her the file number. Anything that old is partially off-site, she said. That requires a formal written request, could take weeks. Weeks. Emma had given me days. I pulled amendments last year, I said calmly. They told me anything new could be accessed in person. The clerk studied my face a little longer now. Suspicion flickered. Then she disappeared into the back. Waiting is torture when clocks are loud. She returned with one thin folder, not the stack I needed. This is all that's cleared, she said. Anything else is under restricted hold. Why restricted? She lifted one shoulder. Ongoing legal interest. My pulse kicked hard. Inside the folder was confirmation of what I already feared, silent adjustments made years after the case ended. Witness names shifted, dates amended. The paper trail rewritten in whispers instead of ink, and on the last page, a notary stamp I didn't recognize, a private office. Now closed, that meant someone hadn't just forged signatures, someone had cleaned a crime. On the drive home, my phone rang again. "Carol, you sitting down?" she asked. My grip tightened on the wheel. "Talk. Emma called me," she said, crying, said she's finally going to tell the family what you did. The air seemed to thin around me. "What did she say I did?" "Something about Harold's estate," Carol said. "About how she lost everything because of you." Convincing, that was the real danger. "Carol," I said, keeping my voice steady, "when Emma speaks on Sunday, promise me you won't interrupt." "Why?" "Because lies sound strongest when they're uninterrupted." Silence. "I promise," she said finally. That afternoon, I followed the notary trail to its grave. The office address led to a boarded-up storefront wedged between a pawn shop and a shuttered bakery. The pawnbroker remembered the woman who used to work there. "Name started with an M," he said. "Closed up real sudden. Lawsuits, maybe." That was enough to find a headstone. Maggie Fowler died 5 years ago. Dead witnesses don't confess. By evening, Michael called again. "She locked herself in the bedroom," he said. "Keeps saying she's terrified what the family will think when the truth comes out." "Do you believe her?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. "I don't know what to believe anymore." That crack was everything. That night I pulled out years of photo albums, holidays, parades, community events. I found her long before she ever married my son, standing in the background of a town parade 12 years earlier. Same eyes, same posture, watching from a distance. She didn't marry into my family, she embedded. By Saturday morning, my dining table held a full timeline. Sunday stood at the end of it like a gallows. At noon, someone knocked. Emma stood alone on my porch. Red eyes, tight coat, controlled hands. "I thought we should talk," she said softly. The lion had stepped into the cage. I let her in. "I don't want you blindsided tomorrow," she said, sitting stiffly at the edge of the couch. Blindsided, the word almost made me smile. "You're kind to warn me," I said. "He deserves the truth," she whispered. "So do I replied. Her jaw tightened. "I didn't understand the paperwork," she said. "I was young. And what was mine was taken." "Pain rewrites memories," I said gently. Her eyes flickered. "I won't protect you anymore," she said. "Then don't," I answered. For the first time, fear leaked through her composure. She left with shaking hands and a brittle smile. That night I made one last call, the retired accountant. "I found the notary," I said. "Dead. I need to know who paid her." A long silence, then softly, "Linda, this could put you in danger. So we'll letting her speak first," I replied. Sunday arrived wrapped in casseroles and false cheer. Everyone gathered. The table felt like a courtroom. Emma sat beside Michael, hands folded, eyes damp. I sat at the head, calm as stone. She cleared her throat. "There's something I need to say." Every sound in the room stopped. And as her first word fell, I slid the first document from my purse beneath the table. By the time this next stretch of my life began, I had crossed that quiet line inside myself where fear finishes burning and leaves behind something colder and steadier. The kind of calm that doesn't shake because it already understands the cost. I remember standing in my bedroom one gray morning, light barely slipping through the curtains, studying the woman in the mirror, an aging grandmother in a faded robe, and thinking how strange it was that she looked so ordinary when everything inside her was bracing for impact. I wanted to expose Emma every single day. God knows I did. I wanted to slam the documents onto her perfect table and watch her story split open. But she was a patient predator, and predators don't panic when you rush them. They disappear, so I waited. I let her think she was winning. I stayed quiet, distant, properly small, and in that silence she grew bold. The first real strike didn't come from her mouth. It arrived in the mail, a plain white envelope. No logo, no warning. Inside, a request for information printed on heavy legal paper. Someone, unnamed, was exploring potential civil claims connected to the Harold Whitman estate, and my name was listed as a person of interest. I read that phrase 3 times, person of interest. At my age, my coffee sat untouched as the refrigerator hummed behind me. My first reaction wasn't fear, it was recognition. She had moved the game onto paper. My phone rang less than an hour later. Michael. Mom, he said quickly, tension bleeding through every word. Did you get a letter today? Yes, I said. I did. He exhaled hard. Emma says her attorney contacted someone about clarity. About the estate. Of course he did, I said. She's been crying all morning, he added. They always cry before they testify, I replied gently. A long pause, then quieter. She says you forged documents. That she lost everything because of you. The words struck like cold rain. Michael, I said slowly, your wife is not telling you the truth. Silence. Why didn't you ever tell me about this? He asked, voice breaking in places he didn't even try to hide. Because when it ended years ago, I believed it was buried, I said, and I was wrong. He hung up without saying goodbye. By evening, the story was already moving without me. I could feel it. Carol called and didn't leave a message. My brother-in-law texted, asking if I was all right. A woman from church dropped off a casserole with pity in her eyes. The rumor took shape the way it always does, quickly, sloppily, and louder with every retelling. Michael showed up just after dark. He stood on my porch the way he used to as a boy, hands in his pockets, shoulders folded in. We sat at the same table where he'd once done homework and eaten burnt cookies. He couldn't look at me. Her lawyer is preparing a filing, he said. She says she doesn't want to, but she has to. Has to, I repeated. She says she only wants the truth on record. The truth, I said softly. Finally, he looked up. Mom, did you ever sign anything for that estate? I reached into my purse and placed the original photocopy on the table. No, but she did. He stared at it. That's not her name. It was her old one. He didn't touch the paper. You're asking me to believe something that would destroy my life either way. I'm asking you to look, I said. He stood to leave without hugging me. 2 days passed, then the knock came. 2 uniformed officers stood on my porch just after breakfast. Neighbors watched through curtains. Linda Harris, one of them asked. Yes, we'd like to ask you a few questions regarding a financial case. You're not under arrest. This is voluntary. That's how they always say it when an accusation is already walking faster than proof. At the station, they asked about signatures, about witnesses, about money that never passed through my hands. They showed me copies of documents, some original, some altered, interwoven with new material that hadn't existed decades ago, fresh lies stitched into old fabric. One officer finally said, a prosecutor is reviewing whether this warrants criminal referral. Reviewing, not deciding, not yet. They released me without charges. For now, outside, Carol waited in the parking lot. Everyone's talking, she whispered. Emma told people you're under investigation. Of course she did. That night, Michael didn't call. The next afternoon, I learned the family had gathered without me. My granddaughter called by accident. I could hear laughter behind her. Plates, forks, Emma's voice. Grandma, she said sweetly. I'm at Aunt Carol's. Mom says you're busy. Busy. That single word told me everything. That evening, my lawyer finally returned my call. His voice was tight. Linda, the claim being assembled is being pushed aggressively through the civil division, and a criminal referral is on the table, but it hasn't been approved yet. On what grounds? The documents provided by your daughter-in-law, he said. And an outside paralegal who authenticated the supplemental filings. There it was, a living accomplice. They're trying to move fast before anyone asks why these records were revised years after closure, he said. If they succeed, an arrest could follow within days. Days, not weeks. I packed a small bag that night, important papers, medications, and the lockbox went beneath the loose floorboard under my bed. The house settled around me like it always had, unaware that it was no longer safe. Just before midnight, my phone lit up, a text from Emma. I told them everything. Justice isn't cruelty. It's necessary. She didn't sound scared anymore. She sounded certain. At dawn, Michael finally called. They're saying an arrest is likely, he said hoarsely. Emma's lawyer confirmed they're pushing for it. And what do you think? I asked. A long silence stretched through the phone. If they take you in, he said quietly, I won't be able to protect you anymore. That was the moment his doubt finally outweighed his loyalty. 2 hours later, the doorbell rang, not once, twice. Firm, official, I stood slowly and walked toward the door, and just before I reached it, my phone vibrated in my pocket, a message from the retired accountant. I traced the wire. The notary was paid from an international holding account tied to Emma's maiden identity. Funds originated overseas, routed through a shell company. I have the transaction record, but if I release it now, the evidence could disappear. Someone inside the prosecutor's office is watching this case closely. The bell rang again, louder. I rested my hand on the cold metal of the door, my heart steady and deep as buried stone. Because the lie had finally grown too large to hide behind kindness. And when I opened that door, the war would no longer be quiet. From the moment I slid that final folder into the lockbox and wrote Christmas across the tab in my own careful handwriting, something inside me went still in a way it never had before. Not empty, not numb, focused. The kind of quiet that arrives when fear finally runs out of places to hide. December crept closer one pale, glittering day at a time, and with every passing week I watched Emma with a patience that surprised even me. She grew bolder in small, careful ways, never reckless, never loud, just confident in the way people get when they believe the ending already belongs to them. She began taking more phone calls late at night, stepping out onto the porch even when the cold cut straight through her sweater. She kept her voice low, her back to the house, eyes always lifting at the slightest sound. Michael noticed. I saw it in the way he'd mention it lightly at dinners. She's just stressed, he'd say, like stress explained whispers in the dark. Love is very good at explaining what it doesn't want to confront. My retired accountant called with slow, cautious updates that made my stomach turn cold. Old inheritance, money once drained from the estate, had been routed through shell companies that no longer existed. Cash withdrawals tied to names that matched Emma's earlier identities. The pattern was deliberate, clean, someone who planned to never be followed. Weeks later, the woman who once worked at the shuttered notary office finally returned my call. Her voice shook as she spoke. She came in crying, she said she'd lost everything her father left her, said no one would help her. There was a long pause. I always felt wrong about it later. But by then it was done. I thanked her quietly and wrote down every word. By early December, I had copies of forged signatures, altered witness logs, mismatched ID numbers, and one grainy courthouse image pulled from deep archive. A young woman stood at a counter under a different name. Blurry, half-turned, but the posture, the mouth, the eyes, it was her. Younger, still the same. I didn't feel triumph, I felt grief. Because by then, the truth was no longer coming to save me quietly. It was coming with noise. Emma's next move came dressed as kindness. She invited me over for tea. I almost didn't go. Every instinct warned me away. But when you already know where the blade is hidden, sometimes the safest place to stand is directly in its path. I arrived at their house just before dusk. The children were gone, Michael still at work. We sat at the kitchen table with steam rising from our mugs while the clock counted every second between us. I've been thinking about honesty, she said at last, about how secrets poison families. They do, I said. She studied me. Some people hide behind age and reputation, and some hide behind tragedy, I replied. For a flicker of a second, irritation crossed her face before the mask slid back into place. Christmas feels like the right time to clear things up, she said softly. Truth always chooses its own moment, I said. When Michael came home, she slipped instantly into her familiar softness, greeting him with a kiss, telling him how lovely our visit had been. But as I drove away, my hands were cold on the steering wheel. She wasn't preparing a confession. She was rehearsing a performance. 2 nights later, the first official blow landed. A certified letter waited in my mailbox. The civil claim had been filed. Fraud, forgery, financial abuse tied to the Harold Whitman estate. A hearing date set for January. Public record, public accusation. My hands didn't shake, but my heart felt suddenly very heavy. Michael called less than an hour later. The sheriff's office was here, he said. They asked about you. His voice broke. Emma says you're trying to move money. Do you believe that? I asked. Silence. I don't know what to believe anymore, he said. That was the moment something broke that I could not repair myself. The next day passed in a strange quiet. No calls, no knocks, just the feeling of being watched by absence. I went to the store and felt eyes follow me down the aisles. That night, someone slid a folded piece of paper into my mailbox. Confess, it read in block letters. By the following afternoon, Carol came to my door in tears. They're saying charges might follow, she whispered. Emma's lawyer has been talking to reporters. To reporters. That was when I knew this wasn't about justice anymore. It was about spectacle. That evening, my phone chimed, a text from Emma. I never wanted it this way, but truth always demands a stage. For the first time, I felt something close to fear again, not of her accusation, but of how many people were already applauding a story they hadn't finished hearing. 2 days passed, then the knock came. 2 officers stood on my porch. This time they did not ask politely. The warrant was not yet signed, they explained, but a prosecutor was formally reviewing the case for criminal charges. I was now officially a suspect. Neighbors watched from behind windows, phones lifted and lowered again. At the station, they laid copies of the documents in front of me. Some were ancient, some were new, all of them had been curated. They asked about motivations, about desperation, about how badly someone my age might need money. I answered everything. I left without cuffs, but now the shadow had a name. That night, my attorney called. Linda, he said quietly, they are pushing hard. A paralegal inside the civil firm authenticated supplemental documents without full verification. That shouldn't happen, but it did. A living accomplice, I said. Yes, he replied, and the evidence I gave you, I asked. We believe it will dismantle their case, he said, but releasing it now could trigger destruction of records, flight, or worse. We need to wait for formal charges. Then we move. Waiting had never felt so dangerous. The family gathered without me 2 nights later. I learned it from my granddaughter's shaky little voice. Grandma, why aren't you here? She asked. Mommy says grown-up problems are happening. I told her I loved her and hung up before she could hear me fall apart. Christmas Eve arrived under gray skies. I barely slept. Just after dawn, the knock came again. This time it was different. 3 officers stood on my porch. One held a clipboard. One rested a hand near his belt. Linda Harris, the lead officer, said evenly, "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of financial fraud and forgery related to the Harold Whitman estate." For a moment, the world shrank to breath and sound and the cold against my skin. As they stepped forward, my phone vibrated in my pocket. One message from my retired accountant. I have the full international payment trail. The notary was paid through a shell company tied directly to Emma's former identity. I've secured the records and transferred copies to your attorney. If this moves too soon, the accomplice could vanish. Be careful. The officers waited. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and held out my hands. As the cuffs closed around my wrists, I lifted my eyes to the Christmas lights on my porch, blinking softly in the gray morning. And for the first time since this story began, I did not feel defeated. By the time December slid into its final week, the air itself felt tight, like it was holding its breath. Christmas lights blinked in every window like harmless little warnings no one else could hear. Emma moved through those days with a bright, restless energy that never once reached her eyes. It wasn't joy, it was anticipation, the kind that comes when someone is certain the ending has already been written in their favor. Word of my arrest had spread fast and ugly. I felt it in the pause before greetings at the store, in the way conversations dropped when I passed at church, in the silence of my phone. Emma, meanwhile, was handled like something breakable. People checked on her constantly. They told her how brave she was, how strong she was for finally standing up for herself. I heard those words repeated back to me like polished knives. Michael came by only once that week. He stood in my living room like a visitor, not a son. The lawyers think things could move quickly now, he said. Emma's scared. So am I answered. For a moment, he really looked at me, not as the accused. Not as the woman from the headlines. As his mother, something wavered in his face, then folded back into uncertainty. Mom, he said quietly, please don't make this worse. Worse, he left without touching me. Behind the scenes, the truth finally became heavy enough to stand on its own. My retired accountant delivered the final packet so thick it bowed my purse, bank trails mapped across decades. Shell companies tied back to Emma under abandoned names. International transfers that ended in silent cash withdrawals she believed no one could ever follow. The clerk from the old notary office signed a sworn affidavit describing exactly how a frightened young woman with false identification and a rehearsed story had pressured her into notarizing documents she never should have touched. When I held that affidavit, something inside me stopped shaking for good. The truth was no longer fragile, it was solid. Still, Emma kept tightening her hold on the family. At a quiet pre-holiday dinner at Carol's, she staged her performance with surgical care. Halfway through the meal, she fell silent, eyes lowered, food pushed aside until someone finally asked if she was all right. Sometimes, she said softly, the people who hurt you the most are the ones who look the kindest. The room held its breath. I used to believe the truth would set me free, she continued. Now I think it might destroy everything. Carol reached for her hand. My niece's eyes filled with indignation, and slowly, without a word spoken, every gaze drifted to me. Judgment settled into my bones the way it once had, decades ago. Only this time I had weight in my purse. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in dread for me and glitter for everyone else. Snow covered the world in a clean lie. I moved through the day on memory alone, chopping, stirring, setting plates. Everything depended on timing now. I slid a slim folder of copies into my purse in place of the lockbox, the first time the truth had ever left my house. That night I slept in pieces. By morning my head ached and my hands were steady. At noon, the family group chat lit up with cheerful nonsense, traffic, rolls, wine. Emma's final message arrived just before we left. Tonight I need to be honest about something that's haunted me for years. No smile, no softening joke. I answered with one word. All right, guests arrived just before dusk. Coats piled high. Children ran wild. Laughter filled the rooms like nothing terrible had ever happened here. I hugged grandbabies, posed for photos, laughed at the same tired joke for the 15th year in a row, and all the while, beneath my chair, inside my purse, waited the rope. Emma entered last, perfect hair, calm eyes, a serenity that comes only when someone believes the audience already belongs to her. When our gazes met, she held mine just a fraction too long. I gave her the gentle, tired smile of an old woman who has been deeply underestimated. Dinner unfolded like every other Christmas before it. Plates passed, glasses filled. The children argued about dessert. For a few terrible seconds, it almost felt normal. Then Emma set her fork down. There's something I need to say, she said quietly. Sound vanished from the room as if someone had turned a dial. Forks paused in midair. Even the children fell silent. Michael turned toward her instantly. Emma, you don't have to. Yes, she whispered, stopping him. I do. She pressed a hand to her chest, gathered her trembling breath, and finally lifted her eyes not to him. To me, when I was a young woman, she said clearly, everything my father left me was stolen through forged documents and manipulated witnesses. I lost my future because someone wanted money more than they wanted fairness. A ripple of shock moved through the table. She turned fully toward me, and that someone, she said, perfectly steady now, was your mother. The silence that followed was so complete it rang. Carol gasped. Someone dropped a spoon. Michael stared at me as if I had changed shape in my chair. I filed the charges, Emma added softly, because I couldn't let the lie live anymore. Every eye burned into my face. When I spoke, my voice was the quietest one in the room. Is that your finished statement? Emma hesitated just a fraction too long. Yes, she said. That was when I slipped my hand into my purse and placed the first document on the table. The second Emma rose from her chair, the whole room tilted just slightly, like the house itself had lost its balance without bothering to warn anyone. Candlelight still danced across smiling faces that had no idea what was about to be broken, and I felt the precise instant the air changed, even though no one else noticed it yet. Michael paused mid-slice, the knife suspended above the turkey. Carol's wineglass slowed halfway to her lips. The children kept talking for a few seconds longer, their laughter bright and unaware, before some quiet instinct drew even them into the hush. Before we move on to dessert, Emma said gently, lifting her glass, there's something I've carried for many years that I can't hold anymore. The room fell quiet with respect, not fear, with trust. Michael reached for her hand without looking. She squeezed his fingers once. He went still. I want to thank this family, she continued, eyes already shining, for loving me when I had nothing, when my past held no protection, no fairness, when everything that should have been mine was already taken. The words landed softly at first. Like snow, then she let them sink. Carol's hand drifted to her chest. My niece leaned forward, even Michael's brow furrowed with confusion and concern. Emma waited, allowing the sympathy to open fully before she turned her head slowly until her eyes found mine. I stayed silent out of respect for years, she said softly, but silence doesn't heal what's been stolen. Michael shook his head slightly. Emma, what are you saying? She lifted her chin. Your mother stole my inheritance. Sound exploded through the room. Gasps burst from every direction. A fork clattered sharply against a plate. One of the grandkids whispered, "What?" too softly for anyone but me to hear. Carol's wine tipped and bled red across the tablecloth. Emma pressed forward now, fueled by reaction. My father died suddenly, she said, voice trembling just enough to sound helpless, and the estate he left was taken through forged documents and false witnesses. I lost everything, and the woman responsible, she stopped, let the silence swell, then her finger rose, pointed directly at me, is sitting right here. Carol turned toward me as if waking from a bad dream. Linda, she whispered, tell me she's not talking about you. Michael shot to his feet so fast his chair crashed to the floor. Mom, his voice split straight down the middle. What is she talking about? Emma's tears fell freely now, shining evidence of pain. She forged the papers, she said through shaking breaths, used her influence, left me with nothing. I was young, I was powerless. I didn't know how to fight her. Then why, Michael demanded, turning on her in disbelief, why did you still marry into this family? Her answer came swift and devastating. Because I loved you, she whispered. And because I kept hoping that someday she would tell the truth herself. Something ruptured in the room. Voices erupted all at once, questions crashing into one another, disbelief tangled with accusation. I saw it in their faces. The old story snapping neatly into place. The cold, difficult mother-in-law, the gentle, wounded daughter-in-law, the guilty old woman, the victimized young one. It fit too cleanly. That's why it worked. Emma lifted her glass again. Her hand didn't tremble. Tonight, she declared softly, I finally choose truth. She set the glass down like a verdict. All eyes turned to me. This was the moment she had rehearsed in mirrors and sleepless nights for decades. The moment she expected me to crumble, to stutter, to disappear under the weight of age and shame. Instead, I placed my napkin beside my plate, carefully, then I stood, the scrape of my chair across the floor sliced through the noise. I agree with you on one thing, I said quietly. Justice is long overdue. Emma blinked just once. Michael turned wildly between us. Mom, please don't make this worse, he said, his voice breaking. Just tell me it isn't true, please. I looked at my son, at the devastation already tearing through him. I would never steal from a dead man, I said, and I would never steal from you. Then I reached into my purse and placed the first document on the table. I'll start with the identity you used at the notary office 26 years ago, I said calmly, since that's where your story truly begins. The light drained from Emma's face so fast it was almost frightening. Panic flashed there raw, naked, before she forced the mask back into place. Michael turned to her. What is she talking about? I slid the next sheet forward. This is the sworn affidavit of the clerk who notarized the forged documents, I continued. Under your former legal name. And this, I said, placing the next page beside it, is courthouse surveillance from that same day. Carol leaned in, squinting. That woman, she murmured. She looks like Emma, I said. The name struck like a gunshot. Michael staggered backward. No, he whispered. That's not possible. Emma found her voice at last. That's fake, she snapped. That's exactly what she does. She's always manipulated, always twisted things. Stop, Carol said sharply, standing. Just stop. I laid the final pages on the table. These are the international transfer records from the stolen estate funds, I said, moved through shell accounts, withdrawn in cash, and deposited under your married name. Emma laughed once, sharp and brittle. You think papers prove anything? You're desperate. You're trying to save yourself. I already gave these to your attorney, I replied. 3 days ago, her breath hitched, and the prosecutor, I added, received them this morning. Silence crashed down hard. Michael turned to her slowly, as if his body no longer trusted his mind to move quickly. Tell me, he said quietly, tell me she's lying, tell me you didn't do this. Emma opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The room began to understand all at once, and that was when the doorbell rang. Once, twice, 3 firm, deliberate rings. Every head turned toward the hallway. From the doorway came a voice that did not belong to our family. Police department. We need to speak with Emma Harris. Her face went completely white. The silence after my last document hit the table, pressed down on the room like a physical weight. Even the candle flames seemed to hesitate. Every pair of eyes moved between me and Emma as if the truth itself were bouncing back and forth, unsure where it was allowed to land. Carol's wineglass trembled in her grip. Michael stood rigid, color drained from his face, his eyes flicking between us as if he were trying to wake from a nightmare that refused to break. Emma tilted her head with that familiar, gentle confusion she had worn for years like armor. Linda, she said softly, almost kindly, this isn't the time for riddles. If you have something to say, you should finally say it. Oh, sweetheart, I had been saying it in silence for decades. I pushed my chair back. The slow scrape across the floor sounded like a gavel striking wood. My legs held me steady as I stood. For years, I said quietly, the world believed I had put my fingerprints on a crime I never committed. I lost my name, I lost my peace. And not long after, I lost my husband to the weight of that lie. A brittle breath moved through the room. Emma's eyes flickered, just once, and I lived with that silence, I continued, because for a very long time I had no proof. Her chin lifted slightly. Until recently, she said too quickly. I nodded once. Until recently. I drew the slim folder from my purse and laid it on the table. The quiet sound of paper felt thunderous. This is the original estate filing from the Whitman case, I said. Filed the year your so-called father died. Emma inhaled sharply. Michael leaned forward. Mom, how do you even have that? Because it destroyed my life once, I said softly. And I wasn't about to let it finish the job twice. I slid the second page into place. This is the forged witness sheet. The notary office listed here was permanently shut down 3 years after the fraud. Gasps rippled down the table. The third document followed, and this is the sworn affidavit of the clerk who notarized those papers. She describes being emotionally manipulated by a frightened young woman using false identification. Emma's voice snapped, brittle and sudden. You planned this, you waited. No, I said calmly. You did. I simply followed the trail you were too proud to erase. I placed the final page on the table. The room froze. Color drained from her face so fast it looked painted away. That is your legal name change record, I said quietly. Filed 2 years after the theft, your former identity. That's not, Emma began, but the word collapsed in her throat. I turned the page. The surveillance still stared back at us. Grainy, black and white, a young woman at a courthouse counter under another name, tear-streaked, desperate, undeniably her. Carol's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, my brother-in-law swore under his breath. Someone began to cry softly at the far end of the table. Emma shook her head violently. It's fake, she cried. She staged this. She's always hated me. She's always wanted to ruin me. She lunged for Michael, grasping his arm. You don't believe this. You know me. You know who I am. My son looked at her hand on his sleeve, then at the papers, then back at her face. Slowly, he pulled free. His voice came out hollow. I don't know who you are. That broke her. Her knees gave way and she dropped into her chair as if the air had vanished beneath her. I was young, she sobbed. I was desperate. I needed that money. I only did what I had to. The moment the words left her mouth, the room died completely. No forks, no breath, no movement. Her eyes went wide as she realized what she had said. Carol whispered, you just admitted it. Emma's mouth opened and closed, trying to pull the confession back inside herself. I didn't mean it like that. You meant exactly that, I said quietly. You stole that inheritance. You vanished. You changed your name. And years later, you came back into my life through my son's heart like it was just another locked door you were sure you could pick. Michael collapsed into his chair. A sound tore out of him that wasn't a word and wasn't a cry, just something broken and animal. The grandkids began to cry in confused little bursts as the adults' terror spilled into the room. Emma lifted her face to me, wild with real fear for the first time. You waited, she whispered. You let me think I was safe. I met her gaze without flinching. You taught me how to wait. From the front hall came a single, firm knock. Then a voice, police department. Every head turned. The door opened. 2 officers stepped inside, radios murmuring faintly at their shoulders. Christmas lights blinked behind them like some cruel holiday joke. Emma Harris, the lead officer, said evenly, you are under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation connected to the Harold Whitman estate. Her shoulders collapsed inward as if something vital had been removed from her bones. Tears streamed down her face as cold metal closed around her wrists. She finally looked at Michael. He did not move toward her. Instead, he crossed the distance to me in 2 unsteady steps and dropped to his knees at my side, gripping my hand like a child who had just realized how badly he'd been misled. I'm sorry, he whispered, breaking completely. I'm so sorry, Mom. I closed my fingers around his. Emma was led past us toward the door. She paused once, trembling. You ruined me, she whispered. I leaned close enough that only she could hear. No, I said softly. You ruined yourself twice. I just made sure the second time had witnesses. The door shut behind her with a deep, final sound. The house remained frozen. Then Michael pressed his forehead into my hand and began to weep in quiet, shattered waves. And in that moment, for the first time in all these years, the lie finally loosened its grip on my chest. The truth stood in the room with us. Breathing in daylights. The room didn't erupt right away the way people imagine it does when everything finally breaks. It went quiet first, dead quiet. The kind of quiet that crawls under your skin and makes your ears ring because everyone is trying to figure out if the worst part has already happened or if it's still on the way. Emma sat frozen in her chair like the world had tipped sideways and left her behind, her hands trembling in her lap, breath hitching in short, broken pulls. Whatever confidence she'd carried into that room was gone now, stripped clean. The family stared at her in a wide, unblinking circle, faces emptied of sympathy, shock sliding quickly into something colder and sharper. Michael was still folded in on himself like a man trying to physically hold his life together with his own hands. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were red, wet, and shattered clean through. He looked at her like he was staring at a stranger wearing his wife's face. "You told me she stole from you," he said hoarsely. "You told me you were the victim." Emma opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, words tangled in her throat like they were fighting to escape. "I was a victim," she sobbed. I made a mistake when I was young. "But she ruined my life too." "You ruined your own life," Carol snapped, the gentlest woman in the room suddenly sounding like someone Michael had never met before. "And you almost ruined all of ours with it." Emma turned wildly from face to face, searching for even one place to land safely, one open door of pity still standing. What she found instead were walls everywhere. My niece shook her head slowly, tears streaking down her cheeks. "You made me look at Aunt Linda like she was a monster," she whispered. "You let me believe that for years." My brother-in-law shoved his chair back hard enough that it screeched across the floor. "You stood in my house," he said, voice flat with disgust, "and talked about truth and healing while dragging this around with you." Emma's sobbing turned ugly then. Real, wild, the kind you can't rehearse. "I didn't plan for it to go like this," she cried. "I just wanted it to be over. I wanted the money back. I wanted her to finally feel what I felt." She turned and pointed at me with shaking fury. "You took what was mine." Michael surged up from his chair like something snapped inside him. "You lied to me," he shouted, the sound cracking through the room like a whip. The grandkids flinched. "Every day of our marriage, you looked me in the eyes and lied to me." Emma spun on him in raw panic. "I loved you," she screamed. "That part was real." He let out a broken laugh that didn't sound like laughter at all. "I don't even know what real means anymore," he said quietly. Those words dropped heavier than anything shouted. A couple of the grandkids had begun to cry in scared little hiccups, sensing that something permanent had just shattered even if they didn't understand what. Carol moved them gently toward the living room with a hand to their backs, but her eyes never left Emma. And then Emma did what she had always done best. She scanned the room for an exit. Her gaze slid to the front windows, calculating distance, angle, the fastest way out. I recognized that look now with horrifying clarity. "Flight." Carol caught it instantly. "Don't," she warned sharply. "Don't you dare walk out of here." Emma pushed back violently from the table, her chair tipping over with a crash that finally broke whatever paralysis still lingered in the room. She staggered backward, hands in her hair, breathing fast and shallow like she'd run a mile in place. "You can't do this," she said to me through shaking rage. "You can't just destroy me like this in front of everyone." I met her eyes without raising my voice. "You destroyed yourself," I said. "I just stopped protecting your lie." She laughed then, loud, hysterical, a jagged ha-ha-ha that bounced off the walls and made the air feel wrong. "You think this ends here," she spat. "You think your little stack of paper saves you." "No," I replied quietly. "It doesn't save me, it only tells the truth." And right on cue, the front door knocker hit the wood, 3 sharp, unmistakable raps. The sound cut through the room like a blade. No one moved at first, even the crying paused in confusion. The candles flickered. The house felt like it tilted on its foundation. Another knock followed, louder, more official. Michael turned toward the hallway slowly, like every inch of his body weighed 100 pounds. Who is that?" he whispered. Emma backed one step farther than another. My chest rose and fell once. "That," I said calmly, "is the rest of your story catching up to you." The door began to open, and Emma finally realized she was out of places to run. The knock came again, harder this time, unmistakably official. The sound cut through the room in a way no Christmas carol ever could. For a long, suspended heartbeat, nobody moved at all. The candles still flickered. The radio still hummed some cheerful lie from the next room. The grandkids' muffled sniffles drifted in from the living room. and Emma stood frozen in the middle of it all like a cornered animal that had finally realized the fence was real. Michael moved first. He crossed the room as if walking through water, slow and unsteady, each step dragging the weight of a truth he had never asked for. When he opened the door, cold winter air rushed in along with two uniformed officers and a woman in a dark coat holding a leather folder tight against her chest. Their presence among garland and stockings felt violently wrong, like reality had torn through the set of a holiday play. "Michael Harris?" the taller officer asked. "Yes," my son answered, his voice hollow. The woman stepped forward and opened the folder. "We have a warrant for the arrest of Emma Harris," she said calmly, "also known under the following prior legal identities." The sound Emma made then was not a scream. It came from lower than that. She spun toward me, eyes wild. "You called the police," she shrieked, fury and terror twisting her face into something unrecognizable. "I did not raise my voice." "No," I said. The truth did. The officers entered fully. Their radios whispered with quiet static. The soft jingle of their belts sliced cleanly through the room. The family backed away instinctively, as if justice itself displaced air when it moved. One officer knelt briefly beside Michael. "Sir, we need you to take the children into the other room." Michael nodded without really seeing him. He gathered the grandkids with shaking hands, whispering to them as his voice broke over and over. Their confused crying faded down the hallway, and the sound split something open in my chest that still has not fully healed. Behind him, Emma staggered backward and knocked over a wine glass. It shattered across the floor in a sharp, bright crack. Red bled across the white tablecloth like a fresh wound. She laughed suddenly, loud, jagged, unhinged tears streaming down her face. "You're all sick," she sobbed. "You turned on me." "Every single one of you." Carol stepped forward, her own tears falling freely. "You turned on us," she said quietly. "You lived in our love and poisoned it." The woman in the dark coat began to read the charges in a steady, unemotional voice: identity fraud, forgery, grand theft, obstruction of justice. Each word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Each ripple widened the end of the life Emma had built one lie at a time. Emma shook her head over and over. "No, no, no," she whispered, like a prayer she had finally learned no longer works. The cuffs closed around her wrists. The sound was clean, metallic, final. Michael staggered back into the room just in time to see it. The sound that came out of him then was not anger, not shock. It was pure grief stripped bare. A broken sound that dropped him to his knees beside the fallen chair as his world finished collapsing in real time. Emma looked at him once more as they lifted her to her feet. For one fragile second, the mask fell completely. "I did love you," she whispered hoarsely. He could not answer. They guided her toward the door, past the tree, past the stockings, past the photographs that still showed her smiling through years she had never truly lived. When the front door opened and the cold rushed in again, she twisted suddenly and locked eyes with me one last time. There was no hatred in her face now, only naked disbelief. "You waited," she whispered. I nodded once. "I learned how, and then she was gone." The night swallowed her along with the closing of the door and the fading crunch of boots in the snow. Silence rushed back into the house, thick, heavy, bowing the air itself. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The candles kept burning, the radio kept playing. Christmas went on somewhere outside our shattered little world. Then Michael broke. A cry tore out of him so raw it made everyone flinch. The family surged around him in a scatter of arms and tears and trembling voices. He clutched at Carol's sweater like a child, shaking with sobs too big for one body to hold. I stood a few steps back. My hands shook for the first time since the knock came. There was no victory in my chest, no triumph, only a deep, aching release braided together with a grief so heavy it still visits me in quiet moments even now. Because justice, when it finally arrives, does not feel like glory. It feels like standing in the wreckage of what should never have been broken in the first place. And as I looked at my son on the floor, surrounded by the family that would now have to rebuild everything from the ashes of one woman's lies, I understood one last painful truth. waiting all those years saved my name. But it cost my family more than anyone should ever have had to pay. When the front door finally closed behind the officers and the sound of their boots faded into the cold night, the house seemed to exhale for the first time in hours. But the air it released was heavy with sorrow instead of relief. For a long moment, none of us knew how to exist inside a world that had just been torn open over a half-eaten Christmas dinner. The tree still glowed in the corner. The candles still burned down over cold plates. Everything that had looked warm and whole an hour earlier now felt like the remains of a life that no longer existed. Michael was still on the floor where the truth had dropped him, his shoulders shaking with deep, broken sobs that came from somewhere too raw for language. Carol knelt beside him, drawing his head against her chest as if he were a little boy again instead of a grown man whose marriage had just been carried out in handcuffs. Someone I never knew who turned off the Christmas music without a word. The sudden silence felt louder than any scream. In the living room, the children huddled together with my niece, whispering frightened little questions about the police, about their mother, about whether Santa would still come next year. Every one of those innocent questions cut straight through me. I sank back into my chair at last, the adrenaline finally draining from my body, my legs going weak now that the waiting was truly over. For the first time since that night in the hallway months ago, my hands began to shake freely. Carol looked at me then, not with suspicion, not with distance, but with regret so heavy it hollowed her voice. "Linda," she whispered through tears. I believed her. I nodded slowly. "So did everybody," I said. There was no bitterness left in me, only exhaustion. One by one, the rest of the family turned toward me, faces swollen with shock and crying. And in the quiet aftermath, I saw something shifting behind their eyes, something settling at last where a lie had lived for years. My niece crossed the room in 2 quick steps and wrapped her arms around me so tightly it knocked the breath from my lungs, sobbing apologies into my shoulder as if she could wash the past clean with tears alone. My brother-in-law stood stiff and gray-faced, muttering that he should have questioned things sooner. Even Carol, stubborn, proud Carol, pressed her forehead to mine and whispered, "I'm so sorry," in a voice made small by shame. And yet, in the middle of all that apology and reconnection, my son remained lost. I moved toward Michael slowly, each step like wading through deep water. When I knelt in front of him and touched his shoulder, he flinched as if the contact burned. He lifted his face to mine, his eyes red, hollow, emptied clean through. "Mom," he choked, "my whole life just blew up." I cupped his cheek the way I hadn't in years and felt the rough stubble there, the solid, painful reminder that he was no longer my little boy, even though in that moment he felt exactly like one. "I know," I whispered, "and I would have given anything to spare you this." His jaw trembled. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" That question cut deeper than anything Emma had ever done. My chest tightened as I swallowed. "Because I was afraid you'd choose her before you had all the truth," I said quietly. "And if that had happened, she would have disappeared again like she did years ago. Then you and the children would have been left with nothing but questions and another lie." His eyes squeezed shut as fresh tears broke free. "I loved her," he whispered. "I know you did," I said. "That was the only real thing she ever gave you." The house stayed awake long into the night, hushed conversations, sudden waves of sobbing that rose and fell without warning, phone calls to lawyers and relatives who couldn't yet understand what had happened, and long stretches of silence where no one had the strength to speak at all. By the time pale morning light crept across the windows, the Christmas table was still set with cold food and melted candles, like a frozen crime scene of a holiday that would never be remembered for joy. When everyone finally drifted home in small, broken pieces, I was left alone in the quiet house with nothing but the ticking clock and the echo of everything that had been said and undone. I stood in the dining room for a long time, staring at the empty chair where Emma had once sat, the place at the table that now felt haunted, and a strange, aching truth finally settled into my bones. Justice does not arrive like a victory parade. It comes like a storm. It clears the sky, but it leaves wreckage behind. My name was finally clean. The lie was finally dead. But the cost lay scattered through my living room in the form of broken trust, shattered love, and a son who would never look at the world the same way again. If there was triumph in me at all, it was quiet and heavy, tangled so tightly with sorrow that I could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. As I turned out the last light and climbed the stairs alone, one final truth followed me into the dark. Revenge, even when it is righteous, never tastes like victory. It tastes like relief mixed with grief. And you carry both for the rest of your life. The weeks after everything broke open didn't rush forward the way I expected they would. They moved slowly, carefully, as if even time itself understood that something sacred had been shattered and needed to be handled with caution. The house that once rang with voices and clattering dishes now felt hollow in a way no amount of cleaning could touch, because some messes don't live on floors or tables, they live inside people, and no broom on earth can sweep those up. The court case unfolded exactly the way the evidence said it would: clean, brutal, unavoidable, no dramatic speeches, no miracles, just fluorescent lights, hard benches, and the steady peeling back of every lie Emma had stitched together over a lifetime. Her past names were read aloud one by one, like ghosts lining up to testify, each charge stacked higher until even she seemed to understand that there would be no last-minute rescue this time. Michael came with me to only one hearing. He sat stiff beside me, hands folded in his lap, eyes fixed straight ahead as if looking at her might tear open wounds that had barely begun to scar. When the judge finally spoke the sentence, firm, final, without hesitation, my son did not react at all. Not a flinch, not a breath, just that empty stillness that comes when someone has already lost everything that truly mattered long before any gavel ever fell. They led her away again, no Christmas lights this time, no audience, just gray walls, cold echoes, and the quiet reality of consequences. And for the first time since she had entered my life, she was no longer a presence in our home, no longer a shadow inside our family. Just another name in a public record. I felt no joy watching her disappear, only a tired sense of something finally closing. The hardest part of the aftermath wasn't the court. It wasn't even the way gossip tore through town like wildfire. It was watching my son learn how to live inside a life that no longer looked like the one he had built. Learning how to wake up without anger one day and without crushing sadness the next. Learning how to explain to two innocent children why mommy wasn't coming home anymore. Some nights I could hear him pacing in his old childhood bedroom where he had moved back temporarily, footsteps moving back and forth long after midnight like a lost boy trying to survive an adult-sized grief. There were moments in the deepest quiet of the night when I almost let myself wonder if I would have chosen ignorance if it meant sparing him that pain. And then I would remember the grandkids at that table, their wide, confused eyes. And I would know the truth, no matter how cruel, was still a safer inheritance than a lie. Slowly, so slowly we hardly noticed it at first, the family began to stitch itself back together, not the way it used to be. Not in neat, familiar patterns, but into something new, fragile, honest. Apologies came without being demanded. Forgiveness arrived in uneven pieces instead of all at once. Carol started calling every morning again just to talk about nothing important. My niece brought the kids over on weekends so the house wouldn't feel so empty. Some afternoons we sat together watching old movies, and every once in a while we would laugh at the same moment without planning to. Those laughs still caught in our throats halfway out because joy felt unfamiliar now, like a language we had to relearn. One afternoon, months later, Michael stood in my kitchen while I stirred soup on the stove and said quietly, "You were right to wait." The spoon nearly slipped from my hand. That single sentence carried more forgiveness than any speech ever could. When he added, "You saved us from something worse," my chest tightened so hard I had to steady myself against the counter. Time did what it always does in the end. It softened the sharpest edges without erasing the shape of what had happened. And 1 year later, on another Christmas evening, the table looked different, smaller, quieter, but real in a way it had never been before. Laughter softer, honest. No performances left in the room for anyone to hide behind. As I watched my grandchildren tear into their gifts with pure, uncomplicated joy, a small, unexpected sound slipped out of me and turned into quiet tears that tasted less like grief and more like gratitude. I didn't win anything that Christmas a year ago, not really, but I reclaimed something far more valuable than money or reputation. I reclaimed the truth, and with it, the right to live the rest of my life unafraid inside my own family. Now, in the quiet moments when the house is still and old memories try to creep back in, I sit by the window with my coffee and let out a soft, knowing ha ha to myself, because karma doesn't always arrive fast. And it doesn't always arrive loud, but when it finally knocks, it never comes empty handed. If you like the story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Fairy Vox for more cozy grandma stories. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.